Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And it unfortunately seems that Politics Joe is actually gaining in popularity over the past few weeks. I'm seeing more and more of them on Twitter, and so I suppose it's quite good that I'm reacting to the vox pops that they do, because as I've said from the start, the whole idea of this Extreme Britain Vox Pop is to effectively let these people talk, and obviously, I mean, to be fair, some of these people don't help themselves, but the presenting of each side of a conversation isn't particularly neutral. You know, on the left-wing side of things, Ed Campbell, the interviewer, will say, yes, I agree with that, that's good. And if it's on the other side, he will ask follow-up questions that are challenging said person. Because Politics Joe is the type of millennial outlet that is simply there for all their journalists to up their status. That's the only reason they do these things. Some of their journalists, it's come out that actually they wrote for the Tab, the UK's university newspaper, or online magazine, I suppose. And these people were, free speech warriors saying that edgy humour should be acceptable, talking about some of their holidays and how there were drag shows and that it made them feel very uncomfortable. Obviously just things that if they wrote them today, it would not be acceptable. It's almost kind of like a troll's remorse type situation. But they've also been interviewing and getting involved with professional left-wing comedians, and so I wouldn't be shocked if you start seeing these people on things like Have I Got News For You, BBC panels, and effectively being like what Novara Media was around the time of Corbyn. Except I actually think the Politics Joe journalists have even less to say than Novara Media types, because at least the Novara Media types try and act communist. These people have absolutely no principles whatsoever and will just say whatever they think will up their status. So, having introduced all that, let's get into the ULEZ protesters and what they have to say. Take it away.
Obviously, for me, it doesn't really affect me as in my car, because my car is compliant.
Because we are not in a lab, we are human beings in the outside world.
I have literally had grown men crying in my therapy practice because they have non-compliant vans.
I mean, already you can tell Politics Joe are going to have an absolute field day here. They also did interviews with, well, I can't say the name because I don't want my channel demonetised, or at least the video demonetised, but they had interviews with people at the St George's Day parade in London last weekend, and are asking people there about the dreaded TR. If you know, you know, I suppose. And obviously the reason I'm not doing that one is because I want to keep my channel monetised, and that is a bad way to do it if I covered that video. But this seems to be where Politics Joe is moving toward now, toward where are any of the mental right-wing protests, quote-unquote, and how can we get them to say the stupidest thing we can think of? And men crying in therapy, I mean, they're obviously going to jump on that. Oh, look at these snowflakes. Can't even handle... I mean, it is such a privileged position, considering that apparently these people can barely afford rent. But when working-class people, who are obviously, the white van men type of people, and they're, have an extra added cost on top of all the other costs in this cost of living, you'd expect a bit of sympathy, but again, the way that they present these vox pops is that effectively they're trying to tell you that everyone here is mental, and hearing about grown men crying, it's like, oh, they're just snowflakes though, aren't they? This is to help the planet, don't you know? And it really is just slimy. I really do hate Politics Joe.
Then all these cameras were always going to be for the police. It's for surveillance.
Sorry, is that an order? She's a liar and you're a Tory.
Yeah, lovely.
I am certainly on the side of I want less cameras in public places in Britain. They don't appear to be being used by the police properly. I was going to go through it in a video last week, but I didn't bother because, frankly, all I was going to say is I don't believe these statistics. But the Times did do a little bit of an op-ed on how people in Britain feel like that crime is going up, but then statistics show that they're not. And I had a quick look into the statistics, and it's from a crime survey, and I realised that the survey just doesn't accept crimes like harassment and public order offences. And so, because they don't count harassment, stalking, public order offences, it starts looking like crime's actually going down, because they've literally just omitted some of the crimes from the statistics. And so it's no wonder that it looks like crime's going down from the statistics, because lies, damn lies, and statistics. So it is possibly what all politicians do, which is try and look like they're doing a good job as it comes up to elections, because obviously we're going to have one this year. there's a whole storyline in The Wire, I've not actually seen it, but I've heard of it, where the police start just letting crime happen more because an election's coming up and they want, obviously, the pro-cops politicians to win so they get more funding. There's perverse incentives absolutely everywhere, and as I say, surveillance state is supposed to be for our protection. It's supposed to help solve crimes, things like that. Never seems to actually be used for that, and so if it's not used for that, what is the point of them? And also, of course, you had the Palestine side calling people on a ULEZ march Tory puppets. Whereas as far as I'm aware, Boris Johnson was the person who first brought ULEZ in. Sorry, just a quick correction. Boris Johnson announced the ULEZ plans in March 2015, but they actually came into operation under Sadiq Khan in 2020. Though, to be fair, this is a protest about the expansion to cover the whole Greater London area, rather than how it is now, which is just central London. Either way, all this clearly is a way for the London City Council to actually make money. That's pretty much the only reason this is being brought in. Any claims that it's to save the planet, basically never trust claims like that. 9 times out of 10, that is not the case for bringing a tax like this in.
If we want to get to net zero, people need to use public transport more.
Especially if you believe that there's a climate change.
It's hard to tell with a lot of people, but when you actually get into a conversation with people say climate change isn't real, they end up actually accepting that, yes, obviously, man-made carbon dioxide emissions are obviously going to cause a greenhouse effect. They just don't accept that that greenhouse effect is going to cause mass extinction of animals all over the planet. It's not going to cause a disaster. It's not going to mean that people are drowning all around the coast. It's not going to mean what all the climate cultists say is going to happen, and I'm obviously on that side of things. But when I explain to people, look, we've known carbon dioxide causes a greenhouse effect since the mid-Victorian period. I think some Swedish scientists found it out. We know from ice cores what temperature the Earth was, tens of thousands of years in the past, even millions of years in the past. We know what the carbon dioxide level is because of these ice cores as well. There is certainly some form of correlation between carbon dioxide and the planet's warming. However, for a mass extinction to happen, you need multiple things to happen at once. It is rarely just one thing that causes it. It's usually quite a few things happening within a few thousand years that causes a mass extinction. Hence, we've had 5 in the past. But obviously, Ed Campbell isn't here to try and challenge him on that, really. He's already said the stupid thing. He's already got the clip. Why ask any more questions? But I'm willing generally to give the benefit of the doubt to people. Politics Joe isn't in that realm of things. Again, they want to be known as the people going around exposing right-wingers for being crazy. Whereas I think a lot of right-wingers accept that there are crazy people like this, and we don't really care. We just want the country to work properly.
I'm here in Trafalgar Square at the last anti-ULEZ protest before the London mayor elections. The backlash against ULEZ since its expansion has been unbelievable, and it's become the defining issue of this mayor election.
Yeah, but I wouldn't worry about it personally if I was Sadiq Khan. He's got absolutely everyone backing him, or everyone that matters backing him. Hope Not Hate come out and say Susan Hall, the Tory mayor candidate, liked tweets praising Enoch Powell. As if a lot of people in Britain don't think Enoch Powell was correct. However, given it's London, and as I say every time, everyone who goes to London describes it as a euphemism for a diverse city. It's very metropolitan now, it's not very English. That actually probably hasn't helped her campaign all that much because, frankly, British people are leaving London in their droves. And so it's not a shock that the candidate who represents that is going to be elected in again. Doesn't matter what he does to the city, it doesn't particularly matter what policy he brings in. He's being backed up, he's being shown as the person who is the multicultural leader in a multicultural city, and therefore a lot of multicultural people will vote him in.
Sadiq Khan's closest rival, Susan Hall, has promised to scrap it on day one. Sadiq Khan has called Susan Hall the most dangerous opponent he's faced.
Do you regret supporting Donald Trump, who is a racist, sexist and homophobe? Do you regret liking Enoch Powell? Do you regret liking Lee Anderson, the Islamophobe? Will you apologise unequivocally?
I mean, at this point, I'm glad that Politics Joe are just very open about not even trying to make this an actual fair hearing of anyone. Just here is Sadiq Khan making a whole bunch of accusations and insinuations about Susan Hall, saying that she's racist, Islamophobic, sexist as well, oddly, for supporting Donald Trump. But after all these wild accusations, Politics Joe don't even try and let her get a retort in there. So in the pursuit of fairness, I am going to show you what her answer was to that.
I do not divide communities. I support all communities. I come from Harrow, where it's the most diverse borough in London.
I mean, fair enough so far. And as I say yet again, Susan Hall's whole idea, as was Enoch Powell's idea, by the way, is to integrate people into an actual British, English, whatever community, rather than having this multiculturalism where there seems to be constant conflict between different cultures, because that is typically what happens unless they do have their defined borders. And in London, it's quite difficult to actually do it unless it's between boroughs, which appears to be what they try to do anyway. Anyway, the conversation continues.
Apologise or not?
No, if you look at all communities...
Why would she need to apologise for liking perfectly legitimate politicians? Enoch Powell, perfectly legitimate politician. Lee Anderson, legitimate politician. Donald Trump was the president of the United States for 4 years, for goodness sake. And I'm not going to lie, I wouldn't be shocked if he wins his second term. And yet, what's your big slam dunk? Oh, these people are racist and you like them. Well, you apologise for liking them. This is where we're at with political debates at this point, by the way, and Politics Joe is just slathering this on massively as well. If you're a racist, you do not deserve to get into office. And again, I don't even believe that any of these people are racist. I don't believe Susan Hall's racist, but obviously by the left-wing standard, as we all know, everything's racist. And so it's been true for quite a while. Obviously, this is just to shut down the debate and make sure that people know, no, if you vote for her, you are the bad person. You are the Powellite. You are a Donald Trump supporter, when in reality, voting is quite complicated and in some ways quite simple. As I went through in a previous Politics Joe Vox Pop, there was an Indian woman that literally only liked Rishi Sunak because he was Indian. Said nothing about his policies, just said, oh, he reminds me of our Indian Prime Minister. You know, it can be as simple as that for some people. But this is the tactics of the left over decades at this point. Redefine all these words that have awful connotations and then apply them to your enemy. And that's all that's happened there. And yeah, Susan Hall's just explaining, actually, no, I'm not racist because I grew up in an area that was very diverse and I didn't have a racist thought in my head. And that's all fair enough, but that's all ignored because Enoch Powell. Anyway, back to ULEZ.
I'm here to see why people feel so strongly about ULEZ and what they really think about Sadiq Khan.
I don't know what it is about genuine grassroots protest, but every time they have to go the most hyperbolic route. There is blood on your hands, Khan. I take it because he is destroying life in London. It's quite a well-known fact at this point that Sadiq Khan has effectively killed nightlife. It's basically impossible to buy a pint for under £7 at this point. Obviously, it costs to take your car into London, though having said that, public transport in London is some of the best I've ever seen in the world, so fair enough there. But then hundreds of thousands are being wasted on like the Night Tsar and other civil service positions in the London Council that effectively just have people doing nothing but going abroad to advertise London, as if you need to advertise London to tourists or to other useless civil servants in other cities around the world. But I mean, this is where we're at. And as I say, with ULEZ, all you need to say is this obviously isn't to save the planet. This is obviously just a money-making scheme. I don't like the fact that it's motorists being targeted for it because we already get targeted with congestion charges in London, the ULEZ in central London, which we didn't want because we already had the congestion charge. The fact that it is clearly more incentivised to take public transport with, you know, Oyster cards, with bus lanes being put everywhere, even with cycle lanes being put everywhere. There were quite a few cycle lanes in London, I noticed last time I was there. But if you were saying these simple things, instead of saying Sadiq Khan is killing people, which is obviously quite hyperbolic, then I think you'd be taken a bit more seriously. But this is the problem. You can't control grassroots people, and they are always going to go hyperbolic. Because British people always go hyperbolic. It's just what we do. So I can't really complain about that because I do the exact same thing. Anyway, let's hear what they have to say.
Obviously, for me, it doesn't really affect me as in my car, because my car is compliant. But the thing is, there is a thing on TfL website called Project Detour, which is a pay per mile charge.
As far as I can tell, that's not quite true, and this is why it ends up being called conspiracy theorists when you have anti-ULEZ protesters like this. So let's just go into detail first. Project Detroit. We are working to build a new core technology platform for existing road user charging schemes to replace the currently outsourced system as the current contract expires in 2026. The confirmed scope of this project is to replicate the capability of the existing charging system that processes automatic number plate recognition events, and according to a set of predefined business rules, to support the congestion charge HGV permit scheme linked to the Direct Vision standard, low emission zones, ultra emission zones, and in the future, user charges at the Blackwall and Silvertown tunnels, collectively known as road user charging. So what this actually appears to be is bringing the existing system of ANPR, the number plate recognition system, into the public realm. So instead of outsourcing all the camera work, the databases, the software, what have you, that's all being brought into a project that is controlled by the council directly rather than being outsourced. And obviously it says at the end, in the future there will be user charges for using the tunnels. Now that's all that the plan has for now. However, this is obviously a software project, so this is in my realm of things. What tends to happen with these things is that there actually is project creep or scope creep. And so what that means is that, yeah, for now, we only intend to use them for Blackwall and Silvertown tunnels in the future. However, this guy isn't wrong to be wary that this could actually be used as a pay-per-mile type thing, because if you've got cameras absolutely everywhere recognising your number plate, they know where you've started from and where you've been, and so it's not exactly difficult to actually work out how many miles their route took and charge them for that. Now, is there anything in the public realm to say that is happening? No, not yet. However, that doesn't mean that it isn't in the plans somewhere that could be brought out in the future. Because an awful lot of things over the past decade have been things that the civil service has just sat on. It's like, here's a plan we could use for the future, and then out it comes. ULEZ being an example. However, to get to the point, this is not part of Project Detroit. At least not officially, I should say. And so this is part of the problem you have with grassroots movement. The conspiracy theories really do go through the roof, but that's only because, 5 years ago, the expansion of ULEZ was a conspiracy theory, and now it's actually happening. And so, of course, they're going to be emboldened. They're probably right to be suspicious.
We had a non-compliant car. We had to spend a load of money buying a car that we didn't need. And quite frankly couldn't afford in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and it's really broken us financially.
See, this is the thing, Ed Campbell just asked the question really, and then instantly cuts back to the conspiracy theorist. Again, this is deceptive editing. This is putting a reasonable voice, it's being sandwiched between the conspiracy theorist, which again, I have sympathy for it, but you've got to bear in mind this is to be shown to the average millennial, like the average normie, and they're going to think, wow, look at all these crazy boomers coming up with conspiracy theories. I bet they're all lying then. And that's the point of a vox pop like this. Get as many crazy people to say crazy things as you can. Put in the normal voices in there as well. And then they'll all be associated with the crazies. And it's really, really bad. Not at all how I would want to ever do a vox pop. But I suppose the problem is that at these ULEZ protests, as much as I don't want ULEZ as much as you got to keep on topic and you got to make sure your facts are right.
So my issue is that if he brings that in, even though he said he isn't going to bring it in, everyone's going to have to pay.
I suppose I should mention it as well. It also doesn't really help he's wearing the Guy Fawkes mask. Anonymous was a thing, 20 years ago at this point, something like that. It's become quite a bit of a meme. This is a boomer who is doing a meme 20 years late. And again, it's gonna get the normie millennials thinking, wow, this guy's crazy. Optics do matter, but as I say, it's quite hard to actually get a grassroots movement to keep on top of their optics. Unless they're left-wing, because their optics are dictated, effectively dictated anyway, by the new elite class anyway. Whereas obviously people protesting at a ULEZ march are not going to be on board with the new elite, and so they will go with different optics. And a lot of them are good, to be honest with you, but you get examples like this where, no, don't do that. It's not a good idea.
Actually, been looking at the air quality since ULEZ being expanded and beforehand, and it's made virtually no difference at all. Because these PM2.5 readings are total utter nonsense. And here we go, got 11.9 millimetre just here.
For the layman, could you explain what that number means?
Right, that number, basically, PMs, right, is particulate matter. That means anything in the air. It could be dust, it could be cigarette smoke, it could be anything. Pollen, tree pollen, raindrops, rain. So we have some fairly damp weather. It's sort of bouncing up and down a bit. So This PM 2.5's limit of the old limit of 10 and the current limit of 5 is complete and utter nonsense, because we are not in a lab. We are human beings in the outside world.
I just decided to let that play because once in a while you will get a Politics Joe Vox Pop where you do just get one of the biggest anoraks that you have ever met in your life. And this guy obviously got so fixated on the ULEZ scheme. As you can see, he even bought equipment to test out the particulate matter within the air of London. And I trust him when he says every time he tries it, it comes up obviously with a different number because they live in the real world, but it's made virtually no difference. He obviously got that before the ULEZ scheme for a few weeks, tried it out, and obviously post ULEZ scheme after, you know, the 4 years or so, he's saying it makes no difference, and I trust him. And at the moment, it's quite close to the limit of 5, and he said it used to be 10, but ultimately none of it makes sense anyway. They're not really testing it properly anyway, because how are you supposed to test it when you've not got a lab? And there's not a particularly good place to take a control test in London.
You know, it would be nice if 45,000 members that are on the site turned up. The last protest, our last push to get Susan Hall in, we need to get Khan out. He's not helping the situation. He's not for London, sorry. He might have been born here, but he's not for London.
Why do you say that?
The police are taken off the streets, right? I think there should be more police officers. There's more knife crime. You know, he's all for promoting himself. And when it all boils down to it, charging working class people £12.50 every time you take your car off the drive, that's not right, is it?
I mean, not a bad answer at all from her, and she's expressing obviously a disappointment that the last ULEZ protest hasn't been very big compared at least to the last ones, and especially compared to the people that's probably said they were going to turn up on their Facebook group or whatever it is. And honestly, a big thing with protesting is that you do actually have to make it fun to get people to want to go. And I'll be honest, that didn't look particularly boring. You know, they were singing songs, they had the hyperbolic signs and things like that. But obviously, as she mentions, I imagine a lot of people on the anti-ULEZ side are genuinely working class, because they do tend to drive a lot more because of the nature of their work. And obviously they don't want to be charged £12.50 extra a day just to drive to work and back, or do their deliveries or whatever. But I will notice that Ed Campbell picked up on her saying, oh, Sadiq Khan may have been born in London, but he's not for London. And I get the feeling he was hoping to catch her out on effectively saying something racist. But obviously she didn't. She actually brought policy she didn't like, which is, as I say, this is a very sensible woman sandwiched between crazies.
See, to my understanding, Project Detroit was the consolidation of the congestion charge, ULEZ charges, into one kind of like simple payment system, and that's the end. To my understanding, that's what it is. It doesn't sound that threatening.
No, but if you go on the TfL website,
I have done. I've read it.
Every car will pay by 2025.
I mean, yeah, Ed Campbell's not wrong here at all. I've had a look around Project Detroit on the TfL website. All I can find is that project title and purpose bit. I mean, there's more to that page, but it's not particularly relevant. And there's nothing about every car having to pay per mile there. You know, the only future use is that every car who uses the Blackwall and Silvertown tunnels is going to have to. And then obviously through word of mouth it's got to him, and he's understood it as every car will have to pay if they ever use the road in London, which isn't the case. But as I say, there is a chance that could happen in the future. I don't think it's going to happen by 2025 though.
So say ULEZ still exists, but then you come up with, they expand the tube massively and things like that, and they create, so people, because obviously this, I think part of the issue is people who live out in Zone 7, say, they need their cars to commute with, don't worry, to commute within Zone 7. But say they introduce like expanded public transport massively, would you support that?
Public transport, yes. But if you're a plumber, love, how can you take your item, you know, just your plumbing things, you've gone to pick up a bath, oh, I'm going to just put that on the bus or the tube. It's just not feasible.
No.
Yeah, this particular woman I think is the best representative for the ULEZ movement, or anti-ULEZ movement I should say, at this protest. So I guess thank you Ed Campbell again for letting her expand on her questions and, you know, asking her more and more. I mean, again, it's hard to tell sometimes with Ed Campbell. I don't know how within the, let's call it the woke mind virus he is, where he assumes all these people are just idiot racists or whatever. You'd have thought he'd have changed his mind on that by now anyway with the amount of these he's done. But again, I don't know if he asked that expecting her to say, oh no public transport, I just want everyone to drive cars. When no, People don't mind public transport. In fact, a lot of people would prefer it be improved, especially for the outer parts of London, where effectively all you have is overground lines. I mean, obviously that could be expanded and it would probably do well. However, as she says, that's not the point. Like, yeah, more public transport, great. What about people that actually do need vans and things like that to make a living or make their living, where typically they're not quite making as much as everyone else? Obviously, this £12.50 is not going to make them think, oh, do I go out in my car or take public transport today? They're going to have to do it anyway. And so I think at the very least, if ULEZ only affected people from outside London, maybe it would help, or at least you could get ULEZ exemption if obviously you're a plumber or you needed to drive around to do your job. People probably wouldn't be as mad then, but yeah, this hasn't been means tested. It's just a blanket, everyone pays £12.50 a day, which isn't nothing. You know, that goes up to about £60 a week, nearly £250 a month. That's an awful lot of money.
Also known recently that it's proposed £2 pay per mile.
Sadiq Khan says he's not doing pay per mile.
Correct. He denies it, but can you trust him?
As I say, there is no public evidence about this, and I'd like to know where this idea stemmed from. But he is absolutely right to say basically don't trust politicians, and I wonder if he's going to go in the direction I'm thinking he's going.
He said would not expand the ULEZ, and look what happened there.
I mean, he's right there, and I have no doubts that there will be more clips of him soon, but I want to know if he's going to bring up something that I think is actually quite a good argument for why Sadiq Khan probably will eventually bring in pay per mile, despite saying that he never will, because as he says, yeah, he said it about ULEZ, that wouldn't be expanded, but then it's, oh no, it needs to expand. And I wonder if he'll go into the reasons of why that changed.
You're part of the Biggin Hill blockers?
Yes, Biggin Hill.
What's that?
We basically stop the installs of the electrical boxes that they are needed to then put a pole in that puts the camera up. So we block the electrical box installs. If there is a box, then we will then block the pole foundation, because obviously they need permits for that to dig into the ground. It's all legal. So if they wanted to put a box in right here, we will stand here and they can't do the work. Effectively
what this woman is an uber NIMBY, and it's one of the rare times that I am actually in favour of NIMBYism, where basically any work by the government is good to block. Obviously, again, that's hyperbole on my part, and I trust her word when she says it's legal, and so yeah, legal protest is fine here, I suppose. I don't like ULEZ, I don't like the surveillance state, neither do these people, and they live in the area. I think it's fair enough that they do this.
Why do you feel so passionately about this?
Because I know there's an agenda.
What's the agenda?
The agenda is pay per mile next, then it's electric, then it's car sharing, then it's reduced private ownership of vehicles, then all these cameras are always going to be for the police. It's for surveillance. You think it's going to be used to prevent crime, but it's actually going to be linked to when we go to digital ID with our digital currency, all linked to our carbon footprint, essentially a credit scoring system.
Goodness me, I'm not actually quite sure how to take that one. Again, scope creep isn't this new thing, and as far as the agenda goes, I'm not being funny. I have some sympathy to the line of logic they're taking. You know, they're effectively using a slippery slope argument. And it actually does make quite a bit of sense, because as I say before, I don't think anyone's necessarily going to bring it up. But what I do find convincing in this is that actually, yeah, this is all being used to scope creep. Effectively the death of the petrol and diesel car, and possibly even the private ownership in the end of it, because I reckon once they do actually ban diesel and petrol and diesel cars, what they'll move on to is that private ownership is bad, because obviously they'll probably say it means that we're actually having to keep using fossil fuels for people to fuel their electric cars up. Therefore, we can't have private ownership because we need people to use the public ones where we guarantee it will be like renewable or something like that. Now, what makes me say that? Well, when Sadiq Khan was asked about his pay per mile scheme, he said, "A pay per mile scheme is not on the table and not on my agenda. I will not move the goalposts on ULEZ emission standards. Londoners can be confident when they buy ULEZ compliant vehicles that they will remain the case. The decision to expand the ULEZ London-wide was a difficult one but necessary one to save lives, protect children's lungs and reduce the risk of developing asthma, dementia and other health issues. Evidence shows that clean air zones like the ULEZ are game changers," despite the guy with the ppm meter saying that it's made no difference, "when it comes to cutting toxic air to protect people's health. It is thanks in large part to the ULEZ that London's air is set to be within legal limits," which again, that bar was lowered, in the next couple of years, rather than taking 139 years without our policies, as projected by King's College London. So they want it to be below the legal limits. They will not find it is going below the legal limits, as the guy says. It's not making any difference, really. And therefore, when it appears that nothing has actually changed, they're of course going to expand it. So I can see where the slippery slope idea comes from. Obviously, it's not being publicly talked about yet, but neither was ULEZ. You know, these things come into being. And I'd rather ask where they get the ideas from, rather than just, you know, oh, look, they're just crazy conspiracy theorists, I'll just leave them at that. It just makes the whole conversation so disinteresting, and it's so obvious what Politics Joe are doing. It's why I feel like I have to cover it and point it out constantly. Like, I pretty much do one of these a week.
And loads of mayors around England, they're going low neighbourhoods, paper mile, clean air zones, whatever you want to call it. And it's a global push to stop people using their cars.
I mean, you can see why people say things like this, because, I mean, number one, when I lived in Manchester, yes, they did try and bring in a ULEZ type clean air zones charge. That was pushed back on massively, and now Andy Burnham's decided, no, he's not going to do that. It's still under review. And then when I moved to Wales, I mean, part of the reason for the 20 mile per hour zones, obviously they were saying, oh, it's for safety of pedestrians, but also another reason was to try and reduce emissions, which they were quite open about. And now it's just really painful to drive through some areas because it feels like you're at walking speed. But then also, when you go between Chester and North Wales, there's just a big section of motorway that's 50 miles an hour. And again, it's to keep the air clean. There's big red signs saying it on the way there. And it just appears to be a death by 1,000 cuts way of trying to get people to stop driving. The problem is that in North Wales, that's pretty much impossible because it's so rural and because buses only come about once every 2 hours. And the nearest train station to me is about 5 miles away. You need a car. So Wales hasn't quite gone as bad as trying to charge people for using their cars, because that would cause an uproar, but they're still trying to make it miserable. And then of course people are saying this is worldwide. These are the type of people to think the World Economic Forum is a little bit more than just a money laundering scheme for, you know, rich people around the world to pop champagne. But this was an article they brought out in 2016, and you see articles like this everywhere. Goodbye car ownership, hello clean air. Welcome to the future of transport. And obviously this entire article is just about, isn't the car terrible for our health? And when you hear this type of rhetoric repeated by all the new elite and by politicians, of course you think the idea is to get rid of cars. That is quite clearly what they're trying to do. They openly say it.
But is that not to do with, like, the effects of climate change? Like, the climate change will be, if we want to get to net zero, people need to use public transport more.
That's if you believe that there's a climate change.
I do believe that, to be full disclosure.
If you look at the weather modifications that are going on at the moment worldwide, man-made is because it's these global elites that are causing the floods, Dubai, America, wherever you want. They're causing these floods to make it look like there's a problem.
My God, when you make a claim like that, you better have your references on standby in your head at the very least. Because government's trying to control the weather, that's nothing new. That sounds like something that's a conspiracy theory, but it's something that the US has had to pass legislation on. And if they've passed legislation on it, that usually indicates it's actually a real thing. Of course, this is all from Wikipedia, you can read through it there, but even the most recent one, April the 11th, 2024, was a Tennessee bill that bans the intentional injection, release or dispersion of chemicals within Tennessee with the express purpose of affecting temperature, weather or the intensity of the sunlight. So the text on the bill doesn't explicitly reference the chemtrail conspiracy theory, but the sponsor of the bill, Senator Steve Sutherland, said that it is one of the intended targets of the bill. Now, specifically the chemtrails conspiracy theory is that when you see the clouds trails that follow planes in the air, that's actually commercial jets at the behest of government sending out chemicals to try and alter the weather in an area. That's nonsense. It's basic physics. The moisture difference between the jet engine and the world around causes these clouds to form, and we've known that since the creation of the jet engine. However, people obviously know that governments have tried to affect the weather in the past using chemicals released in the atmosphere, and this is just a convenient way for them to say, oh, well, clearly this is a good way to do it. And that's where the thought stops. However, to say that Dubai was intentionally flooded recently via some sort of US attack Yeah, I obviously don't buy that. However, what is quite common practice is that when you do have a large-scale natural disaster like this, every journalist in the world will instantly say, this was the climate crisis, we keep telling you, despite the fact that we have less and less year on year, we have less and less deaths from extreme weather events. We actually have a reduced number of extreme weather events. The only difference is that they're slightly more intense when we do get them. And then obviously there's the recent odd habit of weather forecasters on TV showing temperatures in an area being quite normal for a summer. You know, I think the famous one, if I can get it up, is like mid 30s in Germany, which is quite an ironic thing to say, but mid 30 temperatures in Germany. You know, recently it shows like just Germany covered in red, and then, you know, 10, 20 years ago, same temperatures, everything green. So of course people aren't going to trust you. You're not giving them a reason to. Actually, having a look, it's way worse than I thought. It's like high 20s for Germany covered in red, and it was only 7 years ago that they weren't doing that. So yeah, this has all been ramped up. Of course people are suspicious. They don't believe you. I don't believe you. How is anyone paying attention supposed to believe you?
People here have been saying that the ULEZ cameras are the start of a 15-minute city, a climate lockdown. What do you say to that?
They could. The point is, anything can be used for good or bad. Simple as that.
Right. Okay. Well, okay. I'll get it. You're saying they could be used for a 15-minute city.
They could be used for
a climate lockdown.
And certainly, if Khan gets in again, that's the big worry.
I mean, I know it's a very politician's answer, but yeah, I don't know why Ed Campbell can't just accept this point that, yeah, Sadiq Khan did say that, you know, you just have the central ULEZ zone and it wouldn't be expanded. And then he did it to save children from choking to death or something. So it's perfectly natural for people to retort your, yeah, but Sadiq Khan said he wouldn't, with a, yeah, he said that about quite a few things, though.
I think Susan is certainly more on the libertarian side of the argument and would therefore be less likely to do it.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the reason I'd vote for Susan Hall if I lived in London.
Someone in their infinite wisdom has then organised a Palestine protest to go past the ULEZ protest.
What, do you think we're going to have another problem like we had with the guy who was openly Jewish? I'm really interested to look inside Ed Campbell's head at this point and see if he really genuinely thinks that it's the ULEZ lot who are going to be violent, given that it is these Palestine protests that appear to be causing London to be a no-go zone for Jews. As, you know, the Jewish community keeps pointing out and nothing gets done about.
Walking.
I mean, I don't really get what this interaction's all about. Is this old guy? I mean, they're both old guys. Is the ULEZ guy saying carry on walking? Like, I don't know why he's even talking to the Palestine protesters. This genuinely looks like both men actually do want an argument, which if they do, fair enough, and I'm quite interested to see where it goes. But I can't see any violence actually happening here. I mean, if it did, then Politics Joe would put it all over Twitter, but they haven't, so let's see where it goes.
Sorry, is that an order?
Yeah, lovely.
Oh, boo. It's just an insult-flinging match. That's all that happened. I mean, I don't know what Ed Campbell was expecting. I didn't expect much more than that, but anyway. No doubt he's going to ask some Palestinians about what they think, by which I mean Palestinian protesters.
Thoughts on ULEZ?
On US?
ULEZ.
Oh, I can't stand it. It's horrible. Yeah, it's terrible.
You've got common cause with these guys.
No, absolutely no. I mean, I support him. He doesn't realise that I'm with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's the thing is, he reads the Daily Mail and the Sun, so he's very uneducated.
I think this is actually the best vox pop I think I've heard from the Palestinian protesters, like especially from the. I have said for ages that at these pro-Palestinian protests, basically all white people there are new elite people seeking status, and that is pretty much confirmed that for me. What this guy has said is, effectively, I agree with everything he's doing here, apart from obviously being on the Tory candidate's side, but I really don't like ULEZ. However, that man reads newspapers that I know I don't like and I'm not supposed to like and have to denigrate him for reading. He doesn't even know if he reads the Daily Mail and the Sun. I mean, to be honest, he probably does, but that's not the point. He's making a whole load of bigoted assumptions about him, but then said, oh, but I actually do agree with him. What effectively he is doing is trying to signal that he is a midwit. and say I am actually above these low IQ conspiracy theorists. However, I do agree that ULEZ is a really bad thing. You know, I am allowed to signal that, but I'm not allowed to signal it with them despite the fact I agree with them. And what he knows about Palestine and things like that, probably on the same level as the man who reads the Daily Mail and the Sun. But he knows that if he goes to, you know, as Liz Truss says, if he goes to a London dinner party saying, oh yes, I was at the Palestinian protest the other day, he knows he's going to improve his standing in whatever circles he puts himself in. But even here where he says, yeah, I'm anti-ULEZ, that's probably acceptable at these type of London dinner parties, but you have to then add on top of that, but I hate the people protesting them. Because it's all about status seeking, that's all it is. And so it's really funny that that's come up in this video to me.
Don't antagonise him.
No, I'm not going to antagonise him, but I mean, he's made so many assumptions about who he thinks I am.
Right, and have you done that with him as well?
How does he know who I am? He hasn't stopped to talk to me. So he assumes I must...
Susan Hall is. That's the brains. That's the brains of him.
I just want to say at this point that this is a pretty good cross-section of what Britain is at the moment. This is effectively political discourse in Britain at the moment. You've got, obviously, the guy on the left who, as I say, probably does read Daily Mail, is somewhat aware of politics going on at the moment. It might even be for the 0 seats for the Tory party, but understands that Susan Hall is his best chance as London mayor. And then you've effectively got two people who hate him, who are broadcasting that they hate him to the rest of the world to up their status. They don't really have proper beliefs. Maybe the guy in the middle genuinely does have a proper belief that ULEZ is bad, but because of this whole veneer he's had to like slather on himself, he can't actually have many principled thoughts, because both Ed Campbell and this guy in the middle both only really care about status seeking. That's all they really care about. And so their opinions are entirely formed within the zeitgeist, whereas obviously the guy on the left is completely anti-zeitgeist. And because the zeitgeist is so mental at the moment, it's making both sides seem a bit nutty, but obviously I'm slightly more, in fact I'm a hell of a lot more on the pro-ULEZ side here, anti-ULEZ side here, sorry, than I am with the two people who are clearly trying to make them look like complete and utter idiots who shouldn't be involved in politics. But as I say, all the midwit in the middle has done here is project what he thinks onto other people. That man's uneducated, he only gets his sources from very specific newspapers. As if this guy doesn't read The Guardian and The Guardian alone. As if the first thing he said to him wasn't, you're just a Tory puppet. As if he wasn't making as many assumptions as the other guy did. But obviously, he's the London dinner party type. He can't be like that. That's only for the other side. But like most people, they don't have good introspection skills. And so this is why we've ended up with this being the microcosm of current political discourse. People effectively throwing names at each other.
The brains. This is a guy who's read loads of books. Right.
See, it's this sneering attitude that a lot of people have a problem with, and it's kind of good I'm watching this video, because I forget that people like that actually exist. A lot of the time I think, nah, they can't be that bad. They must have some sort of introspection. You know, their IQ's got to be plus 100, or 100 plus, sorry. But no, I keep forgetting that this is why they're called midwits, because they think they're above everyone else. When in reality, yeah, this guy's probably read some books, but they're all probably the ones recommended by The Guardian, and they're all probably pretty much saying the same thing, and all agreeing with each other. There is no way he is reading things that challenge his worldview, which I have done many times. I've even done reviews on them, so take a look at them. And the other guy, yeah, maybe he doesn't read books. I don't know. Doesn't really matter, because you said, oh, his problem is he's not going to have a conversation with me. Well, you're not exactly being an inviting gentleman, are you?
We would all love to be driving around in £8,000 compliant cars. It would be lovely. Simply cannot afford it.
Yeah, and this is a big problem with governments at the moment. They effectively only socialise with other people who also have a lot of money. I mean, if you watch Ordinary Things' recent debunking Davos video, honestly I'd recommend it. It is pretty good. Goes a bit needlessly harsh on Alex Jones, but overall actually gives the whole thing a good go. And he effectively says the same thing I say. This is effectively a place for rich people to get together, launder some money, and then pop some champagne together. And it's the popping champagne behind closed doors that the problem comes in. But so then when you have all these politicians going over there and doing that, obviously they're talking about, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could effectively just be the technocrats telling the people how to live. And that is effectively why we're seeing a lot of what is being done, such as expanding ULEZ and things like that. But then this woman points out the exact problem. This is all they really know. They don't really talk to people like, you know, me, as in her, and other people she knows. You can't just afford to get a new car to be cheaper in the long run. They don't have the capital at the moment. So if you brought in ULEZ and you then use some of that money to help people buy ULEZ compliant cars if they can't afford them, people probably wouldn't care. But that's not the point of this money raising. The money raising is for other parts of Sadiq Khan's vanity projects, you know, more night czars, things like that. So I can completely understand her position of this is completely unreasonable. And you'd hope Ed Campbell would agree. I mean, he should do. The man keeps talking about how he lives in a flat he can barely afford.
You know, I have literally had grown men crying in my therapy practice because they have non-compliant vans, they can't afford to change them, and their businesses are going to go out of business. And they're going, what do I do? Do I then pass this £12.50 on to my customers as a charge to try and pay for this? Customers aren't going to like it, so what do I do?
Again, all fair points. It's just a shame once again that it's very, very... If I were to do a vox pop like this, I think I'd start with the more reasonable people and then move on to the more conspiracy theorist types, you know, more the types I disagree with, let's say. But again, the way this is edited instead is that there is a long conversation with a few people, and those long conversations with the more mental ones are sandwiched between absolutely everything, to keep reminding you that, oh, these people agree with the mentalists. Which isn't necessarily true, but that's the way it's trying to come across to the normies. I suppose at least on Ed's side, he's actually seeming somewhat sympathetic about these men that are now going to struggle to run a business, but I don't think he really cares. Ed's just trying to get his cushy job at the BBC.
So, for example, where I live, my village is actually small. It's on the boundary of the ULEZ zone. Our infrastructure can't even cope with the amount of people that are in our village. It is only 15,000 total our population is, but I think our radius is about 1.5 miles, 1 mile. That's how big our village is. We don't have good public transport links. It quite often gets terminated if they're running late and either diverted. That's always happened. It will always continue to happen. He's not expanding public transport in the outer boroughs of London, so therefore we're not getting increased public transport links. We have one high street of shops, that's not our full amenities. We have one little supermarket, a handful of shops, and we live in the valleys. So half of our village isn't even on a bus route.
Again, all really, really reasonable things to say about this. Yes, Greater London is now completely under the ULEZ charges, and as she points out, this includes her relatively small but dense village, and if that's the case, yes, having a bus route on there would actually be very useful from the sounds of it. And as she says, with a lot of these people, with what they're saying, they're not necessarily saying ULEZ is awful and needs to go. Obviously there's some people saying that, we heard them, but a lot of these people are also just saying, look, yeah, this ULEZ is being brought in, can we actually make it so that we don't need to use cars then? And can we make it fair? Can we actually make it effectively a sin tax for people that are actually sinning, if that's supposed to be the point of it, rather than just this blanket punishment for everyone who needs a car, when actually there's quite a lot of reasonable reasons for needing a car, especially when you go to outer London.
I'm curious, see if ULEZ has been introduced with a massive infrastructure project, as in they made public transport for your village top-notch, like absolutely top quality. They introduced newer doctors. Yeah, it's hypothetical.
But they're not going to, and we know it's hypothetical. But they're not going
but
to.
say that did happen. I'm curious, would you object to ULEZ so much?
Yes, I would still object to ULEZ. I object to ULEZ on the basis that there's enough counter-scientific research done to show that the air quality hasn't improved since ULEZ has been introduced, and the air quality has always been good in these outer boroughs that are actually in the countryside. We have a lot of farmland and a lot of farmers, and don't forget they're attacking the farmers as well. They're trying to pay off the farmers to kill off their crops. Why? Why do they not want farmers?
Okay, so apparently in the hypothetical world where they do improve infrastructure, she'd still be against it. But again, the more she goes into it, the more I'm thinking, actually, no, she's got a point, though. And again, I think the paying farmers to kill crops isn't quite true. Again, I think this is one of those things that have been lost in translation, but what the government do is that they pay farmers to rewild some of their land. And Jeremy Clarkson goes over this in his Clarkson's Farm thing. That's absolutely fine for farmers who have vast tracts of land and who can afford to sacrifice a few of their fields. But not every farmer has 100 fields or however many fields Clarkson has. And so it's not actually necessarily worth them taking free government money when they could make more by planting the crops. And I do like the idea of some rewilding projects, but I think more realistically, rather than having a few fields in a farmer's land be dedicated to rewilding, I think what you really have to do is dedicate an entire, possibly even national park-sized area dedicated to rewilding. I mean, maybe not that big to be fair, but certainly say if you have, 3 forests quite near each other and there's maybe one road going through, maybe build the road around it and allow the whole thing to just rewild. And if that goes on farmers' land, then the government can pay for it. And that seems a much more reasonable idea than just having a few fields with wildflowers in them. But as she said, she knows that ULEZ... She goes from the hypothetical, where she just completely rejects it. And I usually denigrate people for rejecting hypotheticals. But I think it's pretty obvious that if there were noble causes for the ULEZ, and if it was actually to pay for expanded infrastructure, she'd be fine with it. But even if Sadiq Khan offered that, she wouldn't believe it is her point. And again, as I say throughout this, I think that's reasonable. Anyway, he finishes this clip with the protesters singing. Go to the original video if you want to see that, but that's pretty much it. Yes, there are some people that certainly I would say go down a bit more of a conspiracy route than other people would, but there were plenty of reasonable people there. And they all seem to point out things that I can corroborate are true. They all seem to point out things that, if they're not true, I can see where the word of mouth maybe got people confused or maybe got hyperbolized within conversations about this. Overall, it's a protest. You're going to get all sorts of people. Overall, I think it was a fine one. But as I say, what are Politics Joe incentivized to do? Find the crazies and put the emphasis on them. Put some reasonable people in there to say, oh, look, we were being balanced, though, but they have a thin veneer of what they're trying to do here, and as I always point out, they've implied that the ULEZ has some crazies in there, and therefore the whole thing is crazy again. And they even brought up that Susan Hall's a racist, so well done for that. Anyway, that's everything I had for you today. A quick shilling, it will be the other side of the hill tomorrow. As I'm recording, Humza Yousaf has just resigned as Scottish First Minister, so that will be the main focus of that. If you want my takes on that and to hear me talk about that with a panel, please join us on the Wellington Project tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Regional variations on Tailed Features channel, that will be on Wednesday, so take a look there. And I should be doing Laughing at the Guardian Friday. That is entirely dependent on guests. It may move to Saturday. Watch this space. Anyway, that is everything I had for you today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.